Under the deceptive, almost virtuous glow of perfectionism lies a fear as deep as an abyss and just as poorly understood. It is the fear of one's own immense power. Most of us are accustomed to viewing perfectionism as a symbol of discipline, a relentless pursuit of excellence, or even higher moral principles. And of course, society eagerly applauds those who refuse to accept anything less than flawless. But what if this picture is merely a skillfully woven illusion? What if behind this relentless drive for the ideal lies not might, but vulnerability, a subtle, unconscious strategy designed to evade an encounter with something far more daunting, the boundless true potential that slumbers within each of us? The great Carl Gustav Jung, the insightful Swiss psychiatrist, never considered perfectionism an unambiguous virtue. On the contrary, in his profound conviction, it often revealed itself as a most sophisticated mechanism of self-sabotage. The human mind, as Jung taught, is a virtuoso at creating masks, what he called personas, designed to hide from the world those aspects of ourselves we fear to reveal. And in many cases, perfectionism proves to be precisely such a flawlessly polished mask. It is an impeccable facade that protects individuals not only from external judgment, but more importantly, from the overwhelming terror of having to accept the colossal responsibility for their own genuine greatness. Imagine an individual whose soul is filled with a cherished dream to write a book, launch their own business, radically change careers, or even bravely step onto a public stage. For years, they immerse themselves in study, refining every plan, perfecting every minute detail, and yet they never take the first step. That first step remains untaken, perpetually stuck in an endless not yet ready. The text seems raw, the plan not robust enough, the idea needing further refinement, and in this ceaseless cycle of improvements, days, then months, and finally years fly by unnoticed, erasing hopes in their wake. In such a situation, perfectionism ceases to be a virtue. It transforms into pure, paralyzing fear. Of course, it's a fear of failure, but much deeper lies the fear of success. For, as Jung subtly noted, it is success that brings with it the bitter, agonizing realization, how much I could have achieved, and how long ago. This is precisely how perfectionism gives rise to a state of elegant paralysis. The individual remains inactive, yet appears incredibly busy. They are constantly refining, improving, polishing another detail. Meanwhile, they artfully evade the most dangerous, most fate-determining question of all: what am I truly capable of? Because the answer to that question is not merely magnificent, it is genuinely terrifying. Discovering one's true power means not only embracing its grandeur, but also bravely confronting lost time, forever missed opportunities, and the immense responsibility that inevitably accompanies the awareness of one's own strength. Carl Jung, the astute explorer of the human soul, asserted that our shadow, that mysterious, unconscious part of the psyche, where our deepest desires, profound fears, and unrevealed potential slumber, paradoxically often harbors our unacknowledged, dormant greatness. And when we hide it, we unconsciously erect entire bastions of acceptable excuses just to avoid revealing our true power to the world. Perfectionism is one of the most socially approved traits, a true hero of our time. For how convenient and noble it is to declare, "I haven't started because I want it to be perfect," and how agonizing, almost impossible it is to admit, "I haven't started because I am terrified of who I might become if it succeeds." It is precisely this profound and unsettling idea that we explore in this text. Perfectionism is not a noble pursuit of excellence, but a sophisticated disguise, a deceptive way to keep oneself within the bounds of a small, protected existence, and most importantly, to avoid the piercing, sometimes frightening pain that accompanies the embrace of one's own true power. This will be a captivating dive into the depths of Jungian thought, into the intricate labyrinths of our shadow, and into the unconscious mechanisms that paralyze millions, condemning them to stagnation, even though from the outside they may appear to be making superhuman efforts. And perhaps most importantly, this is a sincere invitation to dare to question one of the most insidious and dangerous beliefs, that the pursuit of perfection is the path to true freedom, when in reality, it may be merely the most exquisite and beautifully adorned of all possible prisons. Perhaps the true essence of perfectionism lies not in the pursuit of flawlessness, but in a deep-seated fear of truly knowing oneself. For Carl Jung, whose incisive, almost surgical mind dissected the mysteries of the human soul, perfectionism is far more than mere obsession with details or an elevated quality distinguishing the chosen few from the masses. From a Jungian perspective, it is something else entirely, a deeply ingrained psychic mechanism that artfully performs one single yet critically important function. It acts like an invisible shield, protecting the ego from a painful confrontation with the inner world, with contents it is not yet ready to accept and integrate. And most astonishingly, among these forbidden contents often lies our own incredible inner strength. Jung brilliantly observed that human existence is a perpetual balancing act on a fine line between the conscious and the unconscious. And it is into this liminal zone where consciousness craves admiration and the unconscious trembles at exposure that perfectionism fits perfectly, like a key in a lock. This insatiable obsession with doing everything flawlessly, down to the smallest detail, becomes a convenient, even noble pretext for avoiding real, courageous steps. For as long as we endlessly refine something, we remain safe, not risking an encounter with genuine challenges and, possibly, genuine failures. True risk is a step into the unknown, while perfection is merely an illusion of control. But beneath this outward impeccability lies something far deeper and more unsettling. Perfectionism is not merely a drive for the ideal. It is fueled by our persona, that meticulously constructed social mask each of us dons when stepping out into the world. This mask, like a hungry beast, craves only one thing: unconditional acceptance, enthusiastic approval, and absolute recognition. For the perfectionist, this persona transforms into a sacred, almost inviolable altar where every detail must shine flawlessly without the slightest blemish. It is not just a desire to be good, it is an acute, at times agonizing need for the world to see them as the embodiment of meticulousness, boundless dedication, and exceptional self-demandingness. This impeccable public image serves as a powerful, almost impenetrable shield, carefully guarding what the great Jung called the shadow. But the shadow is not merely a dark repository of our vices, painful traumas, or agonizing, shameful memories, as many mistakenly believe. Jung saw deeper, asserting that the shadow also conceals dazzling talents, burning desires, untamed creative impulses, and, most importantly, the entirety of an individual's unrealized potential. All of this was suppressed and locked away, not because it was inherently bad or destructive, but because it proved too immense, too dazzling, too great for the fragile ego structure we had built. This is why many perfectionists, deep within themselves, are not merely fleeing from mistakes or failures. Their true subconscious fear is something far grander. They are terrified of such astounding, dazzling success that it would inevitably demand a complete reevaluation and radical alteration of their entire meticulously constructed life, shattering the familiar, albeit restrictive, order. Imagine a person whose soul burns with the dream of starting their own business. Their words are a carefully honed mantra: "I'm not ready yet, I need to learn more, plan better, save more money, thoroughly study marketing, master people management. This is impeccable, socially approved rhetoric that commands respect. But behind this impeccability often hides something else, a deep internal fear, the fear of success. It is the fear of taking on an overwhelming burden of responsibility, of facing heightened expectations from others, of being scrutinized and judged in an entirely new light. Perfectionism, in this case, becomes the perfect alibi. It promises to protect against falling, but simultaneously ruthlessly clips wings, preventing flight. Carl Jung shrewdly understood that the human psyche abhors a vacuum. When an individual is inactive, when energy intended for creation, achievement, and transformation finds no outlet in the external world, it turns inward. There it mutates, transforming into oppressive anxiety, corrosive self-criticism, and an all-consuming existential crisis. This is why, the more strongly an individual clings to perfectionism, the deeper they sink into the mire of anxiety, dissatisfaction, and bitter disappointment. The psyche craves expression, but perfectionism becomes a gilded prison for it, blocking any manifestation of the true self. The pursuit of perfection is not merely a noble desire to perform flawlessly. Often it is a cunning maneuver of our subconscious, designed to spare us from the profound, almost unbearable discomfort that arises when we realize our own boundless potential. For those who have truly recognized their inner power can no longer remain in the shadows. They are compelled to act, to utilize it, and this inevitably entails risk, encounters with setbacks, but also with triumphs which for many prove far more daunting than any failures. But if perfectionism is merely a mask concealing the fear of one's own strength, then what kind of strength is it that can frighten us so profoundly? What is so destructive about acknowledging one's own greatness? These are the questions we will explore in our next discussion. At first glance, discussions about the fear of one's own strength might seem absurd. After all, who in their right mind would avoid power? Isn't that what each of us strives for? To be strong, successful, capable of fundamentally changing our lives and transforming the world around us. However, the great Carl Gustav Jung urges us to look far deeper than superficial answers. For him, the fear of one's own strength is not merely an invention. It is one of the most fundamental, deeply ingrained, and paralyzing fears inherent in human nature. This fear is rooted in a deep understanding. True personal power is not merely a source of triumph, but also the colossal burden of responsibility it carries. When we finally dare to acknowledge who we truly are, it inevitably leads to a stunning realization. We could have done so much more, gone so much further, created something outstanding, or achieved unprecedented heights. And for many, such an epiphany becomes a truly devastating blow to the psyche. For by accepting their inner power, an individual is forced to confront face-to-face the phantoms of lost time, the bitter taste of missed opportunities, and a whole string of deferred dreams that never saw the light of day under the pretext of their supposed imperfection. As Carl Jung said, there is a chasm between what our conscious ego craves and what the self, that deep, authentic core of our psyche, demands of us. The self relentlessly calls us to individuation, to the complete and fearless unfolding of our unique essence. But this call, it is inconvenient, at times even unbearably painful. It mercilessly pushes us out of the comfortable harbor of familiarity, forcing us to abandon fragile and restrictive identities, to fearlessly confront the unknown that lies both within the depths of our self and beyond it. This is why, for many people, remaining small, inconspicuous, seems to be the only safe path. A life lived below one's capabilities beckons with a cozy haven of comfort, offers saving anonymity, and protects from the piercing gazes of the outside world. But to become outstanding is not just a step, it's a leap into the abyss, demanding unparalleled courage. Courage not only to defy external obstacles, but far more challenging, to withstand the scrutiny of others and the ruthless judgment that inevitably pursues anyone who dares to truly shine. For society, no matter how loudly it proclaims its love for genius, often punishes those who stand out too much from the crowd. Those who seem too bright, too powerful, instantly become targets for biting envy, hostages to suffocating expectations, or even objects of outright hostility. And besides external pressure, there is also the weight of one's own shadow. The great Jung asserted that everything we try to suppress within ourselves, even our true greatness, does not disappear but merely plunges into the dark depths of the shadow. And everything hidden there begins subtly, unconsciously, but relentlessly to influence our lives. Unbeknownst to themselves, individuals may begin to create their own drama, sabotaging promising projects, destroying sincere relationships that could have blossomed, or retreating at the most crucial, pivotal moment. All of this is a desperate attempt to avoid the colossal burden of becoming who they could truly be, because acknowledging one's authentic power entails an unshakable obligation to live in accordance with it. And that, undoubtedly, is the most gigantic and terrifying demand of all. The fear of one's own strength, as Jung perceptively noted, is rooted in the most paradoxical nature of humanity. Within each of us, in the most hidden corners of the soul, two powerful opposing impulses intertwine, a burning desire for boundless freedom and a chilling terror of it. The great desire for greatness and self-realization constantly battles with a deeply ingrained urge to remain safe, hidden from all risks, be it the risk of crushing failure or dazzling triumph. For triumph, paradoxical as it may seem, sometimes frightens even more than defeat. For once an individual truly recognizes the depth of their abilities, the mask of ignorance falls forever. The path to pretense is closed. There is no longer room for empty excuses for inaction. The once quiet whisper, the call of the self revealing true potential, turns into a deafening alarm that cannot be ignored. It is at this moment that perfectionism enters the scene. It becomes a cunning refuge, an impregnable fortress where one hides to avoid having to answer that very deafening inner call. Drowning in an endless search for the perfect moment, the perfect plan, the perfect word, or the perfect text, one masterfully postpones the inevitable encounter with the agonizing power of one's own creative force. Thus, the perceived pursuit of perfection turns into the most convenient, socially acceptable, and most frighteningly self-deceptive alibi for forever remaining small without realizing one's true potential. But if all these profound truths and fears are hidden in the most secret corners of our psyche, where exactly does this truly formidable power reside? Where is this colossal might that, according to Jung, slumbers in our shadow, capable of simultaneously destroying us mercilessly and granting true liberation? To truly understand the origins of this problem, we must delve into the darkest, often frightening realm of the human psyche, the shadow. This is what we will discuss next. Why do so many perfectionists find themselves trapped in endless cycles of idealization and paralyzing inaction? The key to understanding lies in one of Carl Gustav Jung's deepest, yet most unsettling concepts of analytical psychology, the phenomenon of the shadow. For the perfectionist, the shadow is not just a collection of flaws, vices, or fleeting dark thoughts. It is, first and foremost, carefully suppressed potential, deeply hidden desires and fears, so powerful that they rarely break through the threshold of consciousness. Jung defined the shadow as everything an individual desperately does not want to be, but which, nevertheless, is an integral part of their being. These are the aspects, qualities, impulses, abilities, and feelings that were banished from consciousness because they did not fit into the meticulously constructed, socially acceptable image, the very persona that each of us presents to the world. In the case of a perfectionist, this persona shines with almost dazzling impeccability. It is the image of a disciplined, meticulous person, relentlessly striving for perfection. However, behind this flawless facade, the shadow can conceal the exact opposite: deep fear, corrosive insecurity, smoldering anger, biting envy. And most paradoxically, it is often here that truly great unrealized talents also lie. In the depths of our psyche lies the shadow, a repository of everything we have ever suppressed within ourselves, deeming it excessive, unacceptable, or even threatening to our self-image. Carl Jung acutely observed that suppressing the shadow does not make it disappear. On the contrary, everything we push away, deny, and banish into the abysses of the unconscious only gains hidden yet colossal power. It begins subtly but relentlessly to influence our thoughts, actions, and ultimately our entire lives. This is where perfectionism comes into play, an astonishingly sophisticated yet insidious defense mechanism. It is like a sleepless guardian, obsessed with the minutest details, who day and night keeps the shadow locked away. The goal, to prevent its contents from breaking free and forcing us to confront uncomfortable and, at times, painful truths about ourselves. But here's the bitter paradox. The perfectionist genuinely believes they are in control, that their titanic efforts are aimed solely at achieving a flawless outcome. In reality, they themselves are under the sway of an all-consuming fear that resides deep within their shadow. This fear manifests as a burning anxiety of exposure, a fear of judgment, an apprehension of shining too brightly, or conversely, of suffering a resounding, shameful failure. Perfectionism erects a seemingly impregnable defensive wall around us. But this wall, intended to protect, ultimately and ruthlessly transforms into our own voluntary prison. And what is most astonishing, most tragic, in the shadow of perfectionists lie not only the flaws they so desperately try to hide from the world. There, too, lies their genuine, unrecognized greatness. Many do not even suspect that their deepest, most irrational fear is not making a mistake, but rather hitting the mark precisely, achieving perfection. For then, they would have to step out of the shadows, embrace their power, and face all the consequences of their triumph, with the full weight of responsibility it entails. Acknowledging one's own potential is like stepping into the world completely exposed, without a single shield. It means confronting the envy of others, carrying the unbearable burden of others' expectations on one's shoulders, and constantly proving oneself worthy, maintaining an unattainable standard. And the most painful part is realizing that all those years spent in a cozy but cramped refuge were, in essence, a precious, irreplaceable loss. Carl Jung saw clearly, in our shadow, in the most hidden corners of the soul, lies a colossal, unspent life force. Everything we so diligently hide, our gifts, unbridled creativity, audacious courage, does not disappear without a trace. It merely awaits its hour, accumulating power. And when this energy is not given a healthy outlet, it begins to twist and find its way through destructive manifestations. It suffocates us with chronic anxiety, unleashes panic attacks, constrains us with obsessive thoughts, and paralyzes us with endless procrastination. It's no wonder that perfectionists often live on the edge, in constant, exhausting tension. Within them lies a dormant yet ready to erupt volcano of hidden possibilities and suppressed fears. But there is something even more sinister, even more insidious. The shadow doesn't wait for grand crises. It seeps into the most inconspicuous everyday decisions, poisoning them from within. In that very email you struggle with for hours because, in your conviction, it will never be perfect enough, never reach that elusive standard. Dreams that never saw the light of day, projects doomed to eternal waiting, relationships that withered on the vine, suffocated by the fear of being not good enough. Deep down, an invisible yet all-powerful shadow quietly undermines every step, while the perfectionist lulls themselves with the deceptive hope of an ideal moment. The true nature of perfectionism is nothing less than a desperate subconscious attempt to avoid confronting this shadow, because facing it means accepting the harsh truth that you yourself are hiding from your true potential, that fear binds you more tightly than any imperfections, and that as long as this virtue seems noble, nothing will push you towards change. But concealing this shadow comes at an unbearable price, and it manifests ruthlessly and tangibly in every corner of the emotional, professional, and very essence of the perfectionist's existential life. What are these consequences? What is it like to live trapped in this destructive dynamic? These are the questions we will explore in our next chapter. From the outside, perfectionism often appears as an undeniable virtue. It is mistakenly equated with striving for the highest standards, selfless dedication, and unwavering commitment to impeccable results. Behind the apparent impregnability of this armor lies a heartbreaking truth. The psychological cost of perfectionism is devastating. As the great Carl Jung asserted, everything suppressed, everything unlived, sooner or later presents its bill. For the perfectionists themselves, this reckoning manifests as debilitating anxiety, oppressive guilt, paralyzing indecision, and paradoxically, a chronic sense of dissatisfaction with life. And this is despite the fact that in the external world, such a person often gives the impression of being undeniably successful. One of the most insidious traps of perfectionism is the endless illusion of almost completely ready. The individual constantly hovers on the brink, about to start, about to launch a project, about to truly express themselves. But this about to never arrives. This agonizing, perpetual waiting for the ideal moment relentlessly drains life energy. Jung aptly called this psychic stagnation. Energy intended for action, creation, and transformation instead falls into an endless internal whirlpool where it swirls without an outlet, consuming the individual themselves. This is why many perfectionists feel constantly depleted and exhausted, even if from the outside it seems they are not taking any concrete actions. Added to this is the deepest suffering born from relentless and tireless self-criticism. The perfectionist does not simply strive for flawlessness in everything, they mercilessly torment themselves for every, even insignificant, real or imagined mistake. The smallest missteps, like tiny sparks, can ignite a true fire within us, turning into destructive internal catastrophes that undermine our self-esteem to its core. Carl Jung rightly warned, when our ego becomes excessively inflated and merges blindly with the persona, that polished ideal mask we present to the world, it becomes unbearably sensitive to any imperfections. For every, even the slightest failure, is perceived as a mortal threat to this carefully constructed identity. Ultimately, the individual finds themselves trapped in a constant, debilitating fear of being exposed. They live as if under a sword of Damocles, expecting that at any moment others will see through them and realize they are not as competent, intelligent, or disciplined as they painstakingly portray. But perhaps the heaviest, most existential price for perfectionism is something far deeper. Jung said that a life lived below one's true potential inevitably gives rise to deep, corrosive suffering. A perfectionist may bask in external recognition, garnering applause and praise. However, an unbearable emptiness often gapes within them. they constantly feel hopelessly behind the greatness they could have become had it not been for this endless pursuit of unattainable perfection. And here lies the main tragedy. To admit this would mean confronting the terrifying truth that years, and sometimes decades, of life have been irrevocably spent chasing a phantom, impossible ideal. This realization is so agonizing, so unbearable, that many prefer to remain in the endless cycle of perpetual improvement, even if somewhere deep inside they already know that they are, with their own hands, methodically sabotaging their own happiness and potential. Among the many destructive consequences of perfectionism, one stands out with particular venom: a distorted, almost hostile relationship with failure. For the perfectionist, a mistake is not a valuable lesson or a step towards development, but a verdict, merciless proof of their own inadequacy, deeply rooted in the soul. Every misstep, every slip-up is perceived as a fatal blow, struck directly at the heart of their identity. This breeds an all-encompassing, paralyzing fear of any action. For if everything in their world must be absolutely flawless, then any, even the smallest, oversight becomes not just unacceptable, but catastrophic. Such a mindset does not merely hinder personal growth, it completely seals off the source of creativity. True innovation requires the courage to experiment, the willingness to take risks, and most importantly, the acceptance that many, many attempts will be far from perfect. But the harmful influence of perfectionism is not limited to the inner world. It casts a shadow over interpersonal relationships as well. A perfectionist, ruthless with themselves, often projects their exorbitant expectations with the same mercilessness onto those around them. Partners, colleagues, friends. Ultimately, all of them find themselves under an unspoken yet heavy burden, measured by the same impossible standard of perfection. Such unbearable demandingness inevitably breeds alienation, multiplies conflicts, and leads to a painful, chronic sense of loneliness. For deep down, no one, not even the perfectionists themselves, is capable of meeting these inhumanly rigid, unattainable standards. And as the great Carl Gustav Jung insightfully observed in his seminal work, The Undiscovered Self, modern man, having lost a deep connection with his authentic self, becomes incredibly vulnerable to external pressure and ultimately is doomed to live in an endless pursuit of conforming to others' imposed expectations. Take the perfectionist. They are a living testament to this. So absorbed are they in the exhausting attempt to maintain a flawless mask that they gradually lose connection with who they truly are. And in this agonizing process, they become increasingly defenseless in the face of identity crises, overwhelming anxiety, and even deep depression. But Carl Gustav Jung, with his characteristic insight, was convinced a way out exists. However, this path does not lie through the ruthless eradication of perfectionism or the humble acceptance of mediocrity. The true solution lies much deeper in the very heart of our psyche. It lies in the ability to recognize, accept, and transform the powerful energy that is now shackled by this destructive cycle. For what holds us captive today, once its true nature is understood, can become an inexhaustible source of strength for building a truly authentic and free life. But how does one break these invisible chains? How does one turn one's own imperfection from a curse into a guiding star towards true freedom rather than imprisonment? To find answers, we must delve into Jung's unique vision, understand his approach to overcoming these debilitating patterns, and finally learn how to practically begin breaking free from this brilliant, yet still a prison. These vitally important questions will be the subject of our discussion in the next section. If there is anything that unequivocally sets Carl Gustav Jung apart from the myriad of other great thinkers in psychology, it is his truly radical and profoundly transformative view of the nature of human suffering. For Carl Jung, symptoms, anxiety, obsessive states, and internal blockages were not merely ailments requiring elimination. He saw in them something far greater, powerful messages emanating from the depths of the unconscious. These were, at times, harsh, but always inevitable invitations for individuals to finally uncover something fundamental and vitally important about themselves. In the case of perfectionism, this message resonates particularly clearly. A suppressed power slumbers within, and an unlived life desperately yearns to surface, demanding its existence. Jung never branded perfectionism as a moral flaw. On the contrary, he understood it as a perfectly legitimate psychic defense, a subtle mechanism created by the ego to protect itself from encountering internal content that, at the time, seemed too immense, too dangerous for a conscious meeting. However, Jung also warned, if this defense hardens, if it crystallizes, it inevitably transforms into a prison, an invisible yet impregnable dungeon shackling the individual. And the only key to liberation from this self-made cage lies in a deep and transformative process he called individuation. Individuation, according to Jungian thought, is not merely a path. It is a profound journey in which an individual becomes who they truly are in their authentic essence. It is a sacred process of integrating all parts of the psyche, including those that were once suppressed, denied, or unconsciously projected onto others. It is a path to wholeness. It is here, according to Jung, that the deepest wisdom lies. The goal is not to eradicate the shadow, to tear it out by the roots, or to forcibly suppress the drive for perfection. The true goal is integration, transformation, to allow those energies that were once blocked and destructive to finally freely serve our conscious life. For the perfectionist, this means a deep realization. The pursuit of perfection itself is not a flaw. It is something more, a powerful driving force capable of creating masterpieces, inspiring bold projects, and leading to truly impressive achievements. However, the problem arises when this mighty force transforms into a ruthless tyrant, demanding absolute unattainable perfection and thereby completely paralyzing any attempt at action. The Jungian path, therefore, does not advocate for destroying perfectionism, but offers to transform it from chains that bind and paralyze into a source of flexibility and genuine creativity. Jung was convinced this process requires not just effort, but a genuine act of courage. It is the courage to face one's shadow, to ask oneself the most honest, most ruthless question, shedding all masks. What am I really avoiding by desperately striving for perfection? And for many, this answer becomes a truly devastating revelation. They are avoiding confronting the true scale of their abilities. They are fleeing from responsibility, from using their unique talent, their voice, their inner strength in its full entirety. For true brilliance demands an exorbitant price. It exposes us to the world, opens us to potential judgment, and most importantly, obligates us to be true to our own authentic greatness. At the very heart of Jungian thought lies a deep conviction that embracing imperfection is an integral part of the creative process. Carl Jung tirelessly emphasized that true growth flourishes not on well-worn paths, but on the fertile ground of mistakes, bold attempts, and continuous learning. Those who freeze, waiting for absolute perfection before taking a single step, are doomed to stagnate. They never achieve anything truly significant, for the ideal is inherently an unattainable mirage. And it is precisely this burning, unbearable truth that the perfectionist refuses to accept. This profound wisdom is expressed with crystalline clarity in a powerful passage from Jungian legacy. Freedom begins the moment you accept that your first attempt will be imperfect. It is here in this realization that true freedom is born. It blossoms when we allow ourselves to know the first draft will be far from ideal, The first video will not shine brilliantly, and the first attempt may result in failure. And this is not just normal, it is absolutely natural and necessary. It is in this sacred space of imperfection, free from the shackles of self-criticism, that true creativity resides. Here, in its life-giving chaos, original ideas are conceived, innovations sprout, and authentic masterpieces are born, bearing the unique, unmistakable imprint of the author's personality. But Carl Jung was not merely a theorist immersed in abstract insights. He always pointed to practical paths leading to this deep inner transformation. One such key path is an honest dialogue with our shadow. What if, instead of painfully suppressing our imperfect thoughts, we allow them to emerge? To write them down, examine them carefully, and then bravely ask ourselves, what truly lies behind each of these fears? What is true in them? Or alternatively, start small, but start. Act, even when everything inside screams about unreadiness, when your knees tremble with uncertainty. Do something today, even if it's far from perfect. For the paradox is that precisely in this imperfect, courageous step, our consciousness gains astonishing freedom. But here it is, the great, at times frightening but liberating truth. The path to the authentic self, to the process of individuation, is never easy or comfortable. It requires immense courage to face the truth and admit the lion's share of our perfectionism is not a pursuit of excellence, but merely a subtly disguised fear. And it requires deep humility to embrace and accept our fragile, fallible humanity. But it is this arduous path, as the great Jung asserted, that is the only one leading to a genuine, vibrant, and, far more importantly, deeply meaningful life. However, alas, simply knowing all this on an intellectual level is catastrophically insufficient. These powerful ideas must be breathed into the fabric of our daily reality, embodied in every single day. How, in practice, does one begin to break these suffocating chains of perfectionism? How does this newfound courage manifest in real, bustling life? This is precisely what we will delve into in our next section, where we will reveal step-by-step practical strategies capable of transforming our imperfection not into a barrier, but into the most powerful fuel for bold and decisive actions. Having delved into the labyrinths of our own souls, many of us probably face the sharpest and most agonizing question: what do I do with all of this now? For simply knowing that perfectionism is just a cunning mask of fear is not enough. Understanding that beneath a pile of endless demands and ruthless self-criticism slumbers your true, unrevealed power also won't bring freedom. No, action is needed here. It's time to breathe life into Jung's great lessons on individuation, shadow, and integration, embodying them in every day of our ordinary, yet so important, reality. The bitter truth is simple but cuts deep. While we languish, waiting for the ideal moment, the ideal idea, or flawless execution, life itself relentlessly rushes past, taking our chances with it. Perfectionism is not just a thief stealing external opportunities. It is also an executioner, robbing us of the chance to truly know ourselves. As Jung shrewdly noted, true suffering is born not from life's difficulties, but from living someone else's life, not our own. In this light, perfectionism appears before us as a sophisticated, though outwardly flawless, trap. It tightly holds countless individuals in the grip of tiny, seemingly safe, yet painfully empty existences where there is no room for true joy. So how does one break this vicious, suffocating cycle? It's time to act. Below are specific and effective practices, drawing wisdom from both the deep sources of Jungian psychology and time-tested methods of applied psychology. First, act before you feel completely ready. Let the initial impetus come from action, not from endless contemplation. If you are writing a text, Finish the draft without agonizing over the perfection of every phrase. If you have a project, launch it, even if it's not the final version yet. As Jung believed, the self can only fully manifest when it is lived in the real world, not merely contemplated in the depths of consciousness. Second, set clear, ruthlessly tight deadlines for preparation. Allocate an extremely short, almost uncomfortable period for planning. Then commit unequivocally to action. Because every additional day spent in the preparation phase only feeds the deceptive illusion that you are still not good enough to start. Remember, perfection is not in endless preparation, but in the courage to act and correct your course as you go. Third, begin an honest dialogue with your inner shadow. When you are gripped by fear, burned by shame, or paralyzed by a complete block, do not run away. Instead of retreating, sit down and honestly, without embellishment, ask yourself, what am I really afraid of here? What's the worst that could happen if I do this imperfectly but do it? Sometimes merely naming the fear can strip it of its power. Fourth, embrace this simple yet profound truth. Any beginning, any first attempt will be imperfect. And this is absolutely normal. It's part of the journey. The great Jung taught that psychic energy abhors stagnation. It needs to flow like a river. If we block its flow, it stagnates, turning into agonizing longing, into a sluggish swamp of unrealized possibilities. It is far better to create something imperfect, alive, than to remain a prisoner of a paralyzing ideal. Fifth, begin to cultivate tiny yet significant victories over the tyranny of perfectionism. Choose something extremely simple that you consciously decide to do good enough rather than perfectly. This could be a text written without endless edits, or a video recorded in 1 or 2 takes without obsessive retakes. Perhaps it will be simply allowing yourself to envision a project 80% complete, realizing that this is already a huge step. Each such seemingly insignificant victory is a brick in the new architecture of your brain, forming neural connections that actively break the vicious cycle of paralyzing inaction. And finally, engrave this fundamental truth in your heart. Imperfect action is always, without exception, more valuable than ideal inaction. These are not just words. This is one of the greatest legacies Jung left us, albeit indirectly. Remember, we grow, we change, we transform not in the labyrinths of endless thoughts, but in the crucible of real, even imperfect actions. Perfectionism so skillfully masks itself as noble qualities: caution, insight, responsibility. It whispers that you are wise, that you have thought everything through. But behind this mask very often hides only ordinary fear, clothed in the garments of virtue. And this fear, if you do not dare to face it, will not just steal, it will mercilessly devour years of your life, scatter your unique talents, and deprive the world of the influence, that spark, that you could have brought to it. Jung addresses us with a deep, poignant call to achieve true wholeness by embracing our flaws. For our true power is born not in the ideal, but precisely in the vulnerability with which we dare to act, no matter what. So here it is, this invitation to life itself. What are you postponing? What are you putting off? Chasing the mirage of perfection.